good morning, good night, good afternoon, happy Tuesday. I am glad to be doing another live. There's a lot going on in the world of boxing that I want to get to. I hope everybody's having a fantastic week thus far, and I hope everybody had a good weekend. I'm Woog, and we are going to get right into it. I'm just going to, for the first couple minutes while people trickle in, just want to kind of go over some of the things that we're going to discuss today. One of those topics is going to be the return of Teofimo Lopez, his 140-pound debut. We're certainly going to get into that, as we will also get into the young Puerto Rican prospect, hoping to become a sensation, Xander Zayas. We're going to talk a little bit about him. We're going to talk a little bit about the Tyson Fury retirement, and the ring belt that he vacated, what that means, and whether we should really place any weight or emphasis on that retirement. I also want to talk just a moment about the Tevin Farmer versus Mickey Bey fiasco, the last minute cancellation. And when I say last minute, I mean the event is in progress, and viewers, whether they're at the event or watching on a stream or whatever, they are notified of the cancellation via social media. It was during an Instagram post while one of the undercard fights are on that we learn that Tevin Farmer, Mickey Bey, is in fact not taking place. So I'm going to touch on that for just a moment, and just basically how something like that can happen. I also want to talk about Adrien Broner pulling out of the Adrien Broner versus Omar Figueroa Jr. Fight. And then obviously, Adrien Broner citing mental health. We're going to talk a little bit about that, as we will also talk about Zheli Lipinets replacing Adrien Broner, and he's going to be fighting Omar Figueroa Jr. this coming Saturday. There are a lot of fights taking place this weekend, so I want to do kind of rapid fire previews, if you will, since I'm going to be dropping a Emmanuel Navarrete versus Eduardo Baez preview tomorrow morning, but I wasn't able to get to Zhang versus Filip Hrgovic, or Roger Gutierrez versus Hector Garcia, or Alberto Puello versus Batir Akhmedov. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those fights and kind of do like a quick style rapid fire preview on those. There are fantastic fights outside of Usyk Joshua 2 that are taking place this Saturday. So I'm going to touch a little bit on those. NMTK is in the house. Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. Yeah, I know I just reached out a moment ago to say what's up to you. Thank you for coming through. Yeah, I just saw that like 15 minutes ago. It was a video. It was either a Top Rank Boxing or one of the boxing channels that, follow fighters. It might have been the Top Rank channel itself. But yeah, it was Lomachenko getting off the plane basically and re-entering the United States. So I don't know what that means in terms of how he feels about how things are taking place in Ukraine as it pertains to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I know that fight fans have to be pretty thrilled. I've been pretty concerned about Lomachenko's, basically not the viability, but just the likelihood that when he re-enters the ring, I mean, it wasn't too long ago that he beat up on Richard Comey. That was in, I believe, December of last year. But I was really wondering, and have been wondering, whether we still get prime, and I mean prime, Lomachenko when he does return. And for us to have any chance of getting prime Lomachenko, it would have to happen sooner rather than later, because he is 34 years old right now. So the fact that he's re-entering the U.S. looks like he's about to be ready to set up another fight, which is, again, great news for fight fans. Jay Foreman is in the house. Thank you for coming through. Yeah, a bunch of good fights coming up, and we're going to touch on some of those. So, I'm going to do a live chat tomorrow, specifically covering all things Usyk Joshua 2. I am dropping a preview on Navarrete versus Eduardo Baez tomorrow morning. But in this live chat, I do want to touch on Alberto Puello versus Batir Akhmedov. That's for the 140-pound WBA belt. I'm going to touch on Roger Gutierrez versus Hector Garcia. Hector Garcia is the guy who beat up unexpectedly as a late replacement, beat up on Chris Colbert, the PBC prospect. And so Gutierrez is going to be defending his WBA 130-pound title against Hector Garcia. I'm going to touch on that one a bit. I'm even going to get into Badou Jack versus Richard Rivera, a.k.a. Popeye the Sailor Man. That's actually his nickname. So we're going to get into that one. And then obviously the heavyweight clash that's going to be on the Usyk Joshua 2 undercard, which is Filip Hrgovic versus Zhang. So we're going to touch on that one as well. We're going to get into a little Navarrete versus Eduardo Baez, but as I said, I have a preview of that one coming early tomorrow morning, so we're going to touch on that one a little more lightly. Nothing is original is in the house. What is good? Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. I know I just said what's up a moment ago. Yeah, thank you. Texas Made, the realist. What's good? What's going on, man? Thank you for coming through. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Heck yeah. And I can't wait to really get started and get in the weeds on a lot of these boxing stories, previews, as well as recapping some of the action. So why don't we start with talking a little Teofimo Lopez's debut at 140 against Pedro Campa. You know, I thought he looked very good. But I thought he did look a little bit rusty, which isn't the worst thing in the world, right? Like, I expected him to be a bit rusty. And it looked like there were a lot of situations where he found himself off balance and whiffing. And I mean whiffing on power punches, where maybe Pedro Campa doesn't have the technical skill to make you pay for that. But I'll just say that it's important that Teofimo got this tune-up fight out of the way to get some rounds under his belt. And I think that it was important that this fight did go some rounds and that he didn't just blow Pedro Campa out of there in the first couple of rounds. I think that there was a big benefit and a lot of value to fighting those rounds. But all in all, I thought he looked pretty strong. It's tough to tell whether his punching power is going to be as devastating at 140 as it was at 135. He's obviously still a hard hitter, and you know, time is going to tell based on Pedro Campa's viability how durable Campa is. I mean, he took a beating, and you could even argue that maybe the stoppage was a little premature. I mean, I'm not going to protest the stoppage. You could just look at the face and see how beaten up he was, but it did look like he could continue. It's not like the way Richard Comey got beat, or you know, the way that Mason Menard got knocked out against Teofimo Lopez. It wasn't one of those. This was kind of a beat down by attrition, but you could definitely tell in the middle rounds that Campa wasn't able to take the punches in the way that he was able to take them in the early rounds. So Teofimo, you know, did fight a lot more like the Teofimo Lopez that we were used to seeing prior to his, you know, I mean, can we call it a meltdown against George Kambosos? Even though he did fight competitively, strategically, it looked like a meltdown. And he was a lot more patient in this fight, and he was setting up his power punches, which is what he does. He's not an aggressive, go for the kill and lead with right hands type of fighter. No, he'll jab up top into the body, and he'll set up his power punches. And he did a lot of that. I just wonder, again, if his punching power is going to truly carry, and if he's going to be able to recapture the technical ability to stay on balance even when he's missing punches, because that's where good counter punches are going to make you pay. If you're whiffing big on big power punches and then getting caught, that's where people could get dropped and stopped and just put in all types of danger. So, you know, I expected to see some rust, and I think that that's what we saw Teofimo Lopez working his way through. If you have a chance, please hit the like button. By the way, I just want to get that one out of the way early. I often go a whole show most of the time before even mentioning that. So, yeah, thank you in advance. But But yeah, I agree. The long time away from the ring, we did see it in this fight against, against Pedro Campa. I do think that we are going to see a slightly sharper Teofimo Lopez in his next fight. Again, this is all assuming that his hunger and his work ethic and his discipline are where they were basically when he was working up the ranks early in his career. I mean, he just had, at least seemingly, I mean, there have always been reports on just how his life kind of ebbs and flows based on what's going on family-wise and just what's going on around him. But if he is basically going right back to the gym and trying to pick up where he left off in this Campa fight, I do expect him to be a lot sharper in his follow-up fight. And it's going to be interesting to see how they matchmake for him next. Whether it's going to be sort of an intermediary step, like something between a Pedro Campa and the very best in the division. I don't think he's going to go right for the Josh Taylor, especially if he wants to fight again in 2023, because it looks like Taylor is pretty hell-bent on fighting Jack Catterall again. Hey Zeus, what's going on? Thank you for coming through. Yeah, I agree, Jay Foreman. As long as Teo's head is on right, not up in the clouds, he is going to be hard to beat. And I think that he's going to be in it with anybody at 140, and that includes Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis. By the way, we do have to see how Prograis versus Zepeda plays out. I just want them to announce that fight sooner rather than later. But yeah, Teofimo Lopez, the only thing that I think can hold him back is the head aspect of the game. Talent-wise, skill-wise, if he's together, he's going to be operating at a very high level. What do you guys think, by the way, of Xander Zayas, who did appear on the undercard? I see him as being a very technically sound fighter. He didn't look as sharp as he did in his last couple fights, but he had been out of the ring a while himself. Remember, there was a setback where he got sick and had to cancel the fight. But Xander Zayas, super young. He's like 19 years old right now. He is, showing a technical ability that is ahead of his age, we'll say. He's kind of ahead of schedule, the same way that, well, in a similar way that I thought Devin Haney was when he was like 19 years old, 20 years old. It's like, man, this guy just looks like he's technically sound. Usually, you'll see somebody's physical gifts shine early, and then they have to start polishing up the sweet science parts of the game. With Xander Zayas, he's looking technical, and we're going to see if he has the physical and the natural goods to then become A-plus level fighter, right? Because right now he's still fighting the guys, basically the guys without a Wikipedia page, right? Just guys where he's going to develop more and more experience. He's a ways off, but again, he's showing a lot of promising signs of being a very viable contender in the not too distant future. Again, he's only 19 years old. And MTK said, I noticed that when he was showing lots of when he was showing a lot of emotion before the fight, he being Teo, he doesn't want to show it, but it's noticeable. He needs to sharpen his mind with his skills. Yeah, sometimes he does kind of wear his emotions on his sleeve. You see that in certain cases work for fighters, but it looks like it's more of a tell when Teofimo Lopez is emotionally when he's displaying his emotion. Especially, I mean, because it's weird, with certain fighters and their crazy pops / trainers, we'll call them. Take, for instance, Danny Garcia and Angel Garcia. It's like a yin and a yang, right, in terms of their temperaments. But you can see a lot of Teo's pops in Teo, right? And I hope that works to Teo's service down the line, and not to his disservice, because it can really cut both ways. Like even the great Shane Mosley ran into a point of his career where he had to fire his dad, Jack Mosley, who wasn't one of those loud, boisterous dads. He was pretty low-key, and still Mosley, Shane, knew that it was time, hey, I've got to get some tutelage elsewhere. Let's see. We have Nothing is Original saying Teo is still getting acclimated to the weight, but he looked good in later rounds. Yeah, and you definitely saw Pedro Campa starting to wilt in real time. Granted, Pedro Campa is not an elite fighter, but I wouldn't be surprised if down the line, I'm saying in his next 3 to 4 fights, he proves to be like a real somebody, like kind of like Nakatani was looking like a somebody when he stopped Felix Verdejo after giving Teofimo Lopez a run for his money. Some of these wins by for fighters that are coming up, they start to age well over time. Like if King Tug Niambiar ends up doing really well, then the fact that Gary Russell Jr. and Chris Colbert both beat him will start to look better and better. Or with Shakur Stevenson having beaten Nakathila, who we just saw stop Miguel Burchell. That's one of those wins that can age well over time based on how good Nakathila might look down the line. Yeah, good to see Teofimo Lopez back at it. Boxing is a lot more interesting when Teofimo Lopez is doing his thing. He's certainly one of those top talents, young guys too, who just he has scintillating talent where it's like must-see TV. Some very good fighters, even A-level fighters, aren't fighters that you need to watch if you're looking strictly for entertainment. But Teofimo Lopez checks that box. He has sizzling hand speed and power, and so I just hope that they matchmake in a way, and I hope that he prepares in a way that helps him to realize his potential. Because it's one of those things where you don't want his greatest accomplishment to have happened at like 23 years old. You don't want, even though that's a tough act, you don't want to see him like peak too early, where it's slowly downhill from there. You want to see another outstanding performance from Teofimo Lopez to kind of make good on a lot of the potential that we're seeing. Let's see. Another thing that I wanted to touch on for just a bit is the retirement of Tyson Fury, which some people made more than others when it came to that retirement in terms of how serious we were really taking it. I look at it as being just a way to keep your name in the mix, especially during a huge, consequential heavyweight fight like the one that we're about to get this Saturday. By the way, I am doing a special live chat tomorrow at 6 p.m. just covering nothing but Usyk Joshua 2. We're going to talk a little Usyk Joshua 2 today, but I'm going to really just lean into it. I already put a preview out a couple of weeks ago on the fight, but again, I just want to do a chat with you guys. Basically just a couple days leading up to Usyk Joshua 2. I can't wait for that. So that's going to take place tomorrow, same time as today's live chat. All things Usyk Joshua 2. But Tyson Fury was very skillful on how he injected himself into the conversation. Not that he's not already in the conversation. He's still the lineal champ. He's still the WBC champ. And he did vacate the Ring Magazine title, which is something that the Ring Magazine will choose to bestow on fighters as they see fit. Like some divisions, if there's like too much, I think like the lightweight division. Well, no, Devin Haney has to be the ring guy. But like I think 147 is vacant for the ring belt. The ring magazine belt doesn't always have to be issued out. They pick and choose when they do it. And usually it's when you start unifying belts. So in the case of Tyson Fury, it was because he was still the lineal champ. He's still undefeated. He stopped Deontay Wilder twice, and he was the guy to finally take the lineal belt from Klitschko. Not that Klitschko had never lost before or after, but Tyson Fury was the last guy to take Klitschko's belts and his lineal belt from him. So Tyson Fury basically made headlines with that retirement. Oh, Hot Facts with Robert Reese is in the house. Yeah, we got to catch up. Yeah, good to hear from you. Yeah, I see you're doing your thing, and I'm proud of you for doing your thing, man. Heck yeah, and keep on doing it. Yeah, we're definitely going to catch up Thanks. Yeah, big music fan. If you guys are into music, by the way, I have a channel. It's Woog Talks Music. That's the name of it. I just talk all things hip hop, rock and roll. But yeah, big Pink Floyd fan, and this is actually their original lineup before David Gilmour took over on lead vocal and guitar. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of band tees. But Tyson Fury, I'm not going to take that retirement seriously until I see that he vacates the WBC belt. That's when it matters. Because lineal, he'll have to have been retired for several years for the lineal belt to pass. But that WBC belt, he's going to want to keep that one. You notice that the headline related to Tyson Fury, it didn't include Tyson Fury vacating the WBC belt. That belt matters because regardless of how Usyk versus Joshua 2 shakes out, if Tyson Fury wants to fight to unify all the belts in the heavyweight division in a battle for undisputed, he's going to need that WBC belt. So I don't care if he vacates the arbitrary Ring Magazine, belt because they issue it whenever they want to. He could lose that belt, and with his next win, he could get that Ring Magazine belt right back because they'll just choose to give it right back to him. But again, he's not going to vacate. I don't think he's going to vacate that WBC belt. But it's going to be interesting because a lot of people have a hunch that he doesn't really want to fight Alexander Usyk. That's just the theory that a lot of people have out there. But and some think that it's a stylistic thing, being that Usyk's a quick southpaw who's, a little bit shorter, who's got better legs, better feet than Tyson Fury, arguably. But, and plus, the money in a Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk fight isn't going to be as big as if AJ beats Usyk in this rematch. The money in a Tyson Fury versus AJ fight would be outrageous amounts of money. I think that's what Tyson Fury is privately pulling for. He wants AJ to win. I think that he believes that it's a better stylistic matchup for him. I think he likes his chances of beating AJ more than Usyk. I mean, deep down inside, he's a confident guy. I'm willing to bet that he privately believes he beats both guys. I mean, you don't get to where Tyson Fury has gotten by not being a confident guy. But, there's just so much more sizzle in a potential Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua match. Although I think that it would be very interesting to see Fury versus Usyk. So I think Fury's going to continue to hold on to that WBC belt. Everything else is just, it's all headline making. Fighters like Tyson Fury fight once, maybe twice a year anyway. So what does it matter if, after, knocking out Dillian White, if you say you're going to retire, if your timetable for returning to the ring is the same anyway, if it's still going to be like 6 to 8 months later or 7 to 9 months later, it's not like he's retiring and that means that he has to stay out of the ring for like another year. If AJ, say for instance, hypothetically, AJ knocks out Usyk on Saturday, Tyson Fury could come right out of retirement and they could start negotiating the splits and the venue for Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua. The retirement really doesn't mean anything, nor does vacating your ring belt. Let's see. Jay Foreman said Fury has retired and unretired about 5 times at this point. Yeah, he's and you see certain fighters do that. Oscar De La Hoya did that a couple times. Well, actually, De La Hoya wasn't a big retirer. He would step out for a significant period of time, though, as would Floyd Mayweather. A lot of fighters, at the top level will step away and then regenerate interest and then re-enter the ring. But, yeah, who would be willing to bet that Tyson Fury never returns to the ring? I just don't see it. Now, I believed it that first time when he gained all the weight and he was out of the ring for multiple years after beating Vladimir Klitschko. I really did think Tyson Fury was done with boxing at that point. But ever since then, no, not at all. Yeah, to avoid mandatories without giving up the belt. Because who is the mandatory challenger right now for the WBC belt? Is it going to be the winner of Joe Joyce and Joseph Parker? I'd have to check to see who the mandatory WBC contender is. But yeah, that's a good point. He doesn't have to fight the mandatory, but it's going to be another thing if the WBC, which I think Mauricio Suleiman, head of the WBC, said that he's going to give Tyson Fury like another couple of weeks to make his decision. And I mean, what happens in the next couple of weeks? Usyk versus Joshua too. So everybody is paying attention to what happens this coming Saturday with that fight, because I really do think that fight and its result is going to determine a ton. So nothing matters until that fight takes place. Then Tyson Fury's got to make a decision. Let's see. Lopez looked like Emmanuel Augustus at some points. Hot fast with Robert Reese. Do you mean in how he kind of gets head over skis with some of his power punches? Because I do think that he was whiffing bad with some of those power punches. And again, I think that he was working off the rust. But yeah, he was missing big with big shots that could leave you vulnerable against better fighters, especially. Gerardo Reyes is in the house. What's going on? Thank you for coming through. He said, let's go AJ. Yeah, a lot of people want AJ to win. A lot of people want Usyk to win. I'm assuming that most of you believe that Usyk's going to win. You know, in my preview, I did pick Usyk via late stoppage, but I do think that AJ is going to have bigger moments than he did in their first fight. By the way, did you guys notice some of the quotes that were coming out from AJ over the past week? How much he didn't like fighting southpaws? Like, I looked at that as being a little bit discouraging if you're Team AJ. I mean, sometimes the guy is just too honest, in my opinion, sometimes. Like, there has to be a certain level of gamesmanship. But AJ doesn't seem to he doesn't seem to like beating around the bush or hiding his vulnerabilities or insecurities. He kind of talks about them pretty openly, but I just don't love what that means for this rematch for AJ. But Usyk's looking pretty big too. He does look like he's about 235 plus. I'm going to be interested to see what he weighs. I've heard people say that he's weighing about 245. I've got to see that to believe it on weigh-in day. I do think he's about 235, but we'll see if he's 240 plus. Like, I don't think you want to be too big if you're Usyk, but Eddie Hearn just came out and said he thinks, based on, you know, how big Usyk looks, that he thinks that Usyk's going to try to walk AJ down, which would be very interesting, right? Yeah, Hot Facts with Robert Reese asked, WBC is the belt, right? Yeah, Tyson Fury's the WBC champion, and Usyk has the other 3 belts, WBA, WBO, and IBF. So Jay Foreman said, you might disagree, but lineal doesn't mean anything to me, especially when undisputed is on the line. It's just one fight away. Yeah, well, lineal, let's see. Yeah, lineal is actually something that has like a line that you could trace. That's the whole, you've got to beat the man to be the man belt, right? So regardless of what happens with the WBC belt, the imaginary, if you will, ring belt, or the WBA, any of those belts, the lineal is the one where, unless the champion vacates and disappears, they'll issue it years and years later, like they did for Vladimir Klitschko, years after Lennox Lewis retired, because it was Lennox Lewis as the last lineal champ, and then Vladimir Klitschko, and Vladimir Klitschko never beat Lennox Lewis for the lineal belt. But the only way that somebody could become lineal belt or lineal champion is by beating Tyson Fury. The lineal belt has to go through Tyson Fury unless he retires. But even then, they give it multiple years before they reissue a lineal title, basically. But I don't think that the ring belt matters a ton. The ring belt, to me, only matters if it's like a fragmented division where sometimes if there are several champions in one division, then the ring belt it usually skews towards who's usually perceived as the best fighter in the division. Ring usually kind of gets it right because, again, they get to pick and choose who gets that Ring belt in most cases. And it usually goes to the person who, will have like 2 or 3 belts in that division, something like that. TJ is in the house. What's going on? Thank you for coming through. Julius Armstrong said Filip Hrgovic versus Zheli, best fight this week. So I actually issued out a poll this morning, asking what is the best fight taking place this weekend outside of Usyk versus AJ2. And almost 50% of you guys, almost half of y'all, said Filip Hrgovic versus Zheli, which is a really good fight. Next after that was surprisingly Emmanuel Navarrete versus Eduardo Baez, which I'm dropping a preview on that one early tomorrow morning. That one came in second place, but it was like a distant second place behind Hrgovic versus Zhang. And then after that, it was like a 2-way tie between Sergey Lipinets and Omar Figueroa Jr. and Roger Gutierrez versus Hector Garcia. And remember, Hector Garcia is the guy who surprisingly beat the PBC prospect Chris Colbert. So he's going to be fighting one of the lesser known champions in boxing, Roger Gutierrez. Like, barely anybody was paying attention when Roger Gutierrez won a share of the 130-pound belt, the WBA belt, I believe. And he had won it off of I want to say Rene Alvarado or something like that. And that was the second and third time Gutierrez fought Alvarado. It wasn't a super high profile fight. In fact, it was supposed to be Roger Gutierrez against Chris Colbert fighting for that vacant 130-pound WBA belt. But Chris Colbert, Gutierrez pulled out of the fight. Then Hector Garcia was a late replacement, and that vacant belt was no longer on the line between Colbert and Garcia. And again, Hector Garcia upset Chris Colbert, dropped him in the fight. It was pretty stunning to watch. Hector Garcia is still undefeated. So, yeah, he's going to be challenging Roger Gutierrez for that 130-pound belt. So, that fight, Gutierrez versus Garcia, and Lipinets versus Figueroa, was a tie for what you guys thought was the next most interesting or exciting fight outside of Usyk versus AJ2. And then in last place, kind of surprisingly, but I do think it's a good fight, between Batir Akhmedov and Alberto Puello. This is for the vacant WBA 140-pound belt. So they're going to be fighting for one of the 2 belts that Josh Taylor, former undisputed champ, had to drop. The WBA belt. Remember, the WBC belt, the other belt that Josh Taylor had to drop, is going to be up for grabs, at least as far as we know, between Jose Zepeda and Regis Prograis. But the other belt, WBA, that's going to be up for grabs this weekend between Alberto Puello and Batir Akhmedov. And we're going to talk a little bit about that fight as well. That's the thing about the fights this weekend outside of Usyk versus AJ2. They're not the highest profile fights. They're not the biggest names in the sport. But if you want to see some pretty evenly matched, unknown contenders looking to be champions, tune in this Saturday, because it's a few good fights that are nearly 50-50 fights. Like Puello versus Akhmedov, that one feels like a coin flip. You've got a stylist in Puello against Akhmedov, who, I don't know if you guys saw, Akhmedov fought super evenly with a then undefeated Mario Barrios. And Barrios dropped him twice, and Akhmedov still almost won that fight. And he beat up Barrios way worse than he was beaten up. Akhmedov came on so strong in the second half of that fight to where the scorecards could have gone either way. Barrios was awarded the win, and again, it was largely because of those 2 knockdowns scored on Akhmedov. And one of those 2 knockdowns came like in the last 30 seconds of the 12th round. Like, Barrios had to finish strong because, again, he was losing big time in the second half of that fight against Akhmedov. So Puello, again, like Puello, to me, he looks like he could be like a a harder hitting Paulie Malignaggi. He's got more power than Malignaggi, but he's a southpaw where if you didn't know any better, you would think because of his style that he might be a Cuban fighter, but he actually has more power than and he engages more than a lot of the high level elite Cuban fighters. So yeah, Puello versus Akhmedov, that one's damn near a coin flip, as is Roger Gutierrez versus Hector Garcia. I'm excited about both of those. But yeah, Filip Hrgovic versus Zheli. These guys are both 6'6". They're both undefeated fighters, but Hrgovic has the reputation of being kind of the boogeyman in the division. Like when they were matchmaking for Hrgovic's next fight, they gave Joseph Parker a chance to, fight for the what was it? not an interim belt, but fight to become like the #1 contender for like the IBF, I believe. Joseph Parker turned it down. High risk, low reward. Michael Hunter turned it down, and like 2 or 3 other fighters said thanks but no thanks to fighting Hrgovic. So Zheli, undefeated fighter from he's a Chinese fighter who's fighting out of New Jersey. So he's been spending like the last several years in the United States, but he's of Chinese descent. Undefeated fighter. TJ said, "Nah, man, Baez coming up in weight. I see a late stoppage. Navarrete is a monster." I'm gonna get to some of your comments about Navarrete, Baez, definitely. But Hrgovic seemed to be the boogeyman, but this is gonna be a tough fight because he's gonna be matched in height against a 6'6" Zheli, who's also a southpaw, who starts off pretty fast, and he has fast hands. So this is gonna be unlike anybody Hrgovic has had to fight at this point. The one thing that a lot of people are going to look at when it comes to Zheli, and they're going to have questions about it, is Zheli, or should I say Zhang or Zheli, he had a fight with Jerry Forrest, same Jerry Forrest who recently lost to Kubrat Pulev, but fought to a draw with Michael Hunter. Zheli knocked Jerry Forrest down 3 times in 3 rounds, and then lost just about every round after that in a 10-round fight, and basically looked like he was having like a medical issue, which he was proven to have a medical issue. He totally gassed. He looked like he wasn't too far away from becoming Vladimir Klitschko in that loss to Layman Brewster. If you ever saw that fight, Vladimir Klitschko was just dominating. Then suddenly, in the middle rounds, he just looked like he was just out of gas completely, and Layman Brewster finished him, where it looked like Vladimir Klitschko might have been having a heart attack in that fight. Zheli was basically, it turned out, because he went to the hospital afterwards, it looked like he had a big health issue in that fight against Jerry Forrest, which might explain why Jerry Forrest was able to win, again, just about every round after getting dropped 3 times in 3 rounds. But outside of that big hiccup for Zheli, and keep in mind, he did, that fight resulted in a draw between Jerry Forrest and Zheli. Zhang is an undefeated fighter. So this matchup between him and Hrgovic, it's certainly worth a watch. I'm still going to pick Hrgovic. I think he's going to figure it out after the first 2 to 3 rounds. Not to mention, Zheli is 39 years old. And I know that heavyweights tend to age slower than fighters in other divisions. But Hrgovic, he's in his late 20s. And he just looks like he has tools to become a future heavyweight champion. I think he was a bronze-silver Olympic medalist. No, bronze-silver. He was a bronze Olympic medalist, and I think that he had lost to Tony Yoka, who we just saw lose in his last fight. Big-time prospect. He ended up winning the gold over Joe Joyce in that same Olympics. But yeah, Filip Hrgovic, kind of the boogeyman of the division. I'm still going to pick him to beat Zheli, but I don't think it's going to be via stoppage. I think he beats Zheli via decision. But yeah, you're right. A lot of big fights and good fights outside of Usyk versus Joshua 2 coming up this weekend. I'm going to get to some of your comments. Let's see. Julius Armstrong, what's going on? Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. Um, let's see. So, nothing is original said. Yeah, exactly. As long as Tyson Fury hasn't given up the WBC belt, the fight is still active. Yeah, he's still an active fighter. I agree. The WBC 1 is Wilder 2. Is Wilder number 2, and then Joe Joyce. Okay, and Wilder's about to fight Robert Helenius. I don't. Have they made that fight official? Like, is there a flyer out? PBC is like, like Matchroom, usually keeps things under wraps until they have like an official date, venue set, everything, and then they'll already have the flyer. They don't tease fights for too long. I mean, they all tease fights for too long, but they don't say something is announced. They don't make a big announcement until all of the boxes are checked. I noticed that about PBC specifically. Like when they announced Errol Spence versus Pacquiao or Pacquiao versus Spence. They had the flyer, the venue, everything ready to go, I believe. So I'm expecting the same thing whenever they do announce Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. Let's see. Yeah, so as I said, Julius Armstrong said that Hrgovic versus Zhang is the best fight this week. Outside of Usyk Joshua 2, I still think Usyk Joshua 2 has to take the cake just because of the stakes involved. And I mean, let's keep it real. Like AJ and what he's meant to boxing over the past 5 years, it's just a hugely consequential fight. But in terms of like pick 'em 50-50, yeah, Hrgovic versus Zhang is very good. Let's see. Julius Armstrong said at TJ, what are the upsets this week? Gerardo Reyes just said, what do you think about Robert Garcia? What do I think that he's going to bring to the table for AJ? Like, I don't think AJ is going to reinvent the wheel for this one. You know what? This is the thing. With AJ, there's been added pressure because of the way that he lost the last fight, which is unlike the way that he lost to Andy Ruiz, right? He basically got a little bit too tenacious after dropping Ruiz, and then he got caught, hurt, dropped twice, eventually dropped 4 times and stopped. But against Usyk, too patient, playing chess versus a chess master, and that's how he really lost that one, right? So the tendency or the inclination would be to get way more aggressive. Use your size, use your physicality, all of those things, right? What if they totally throw a curveball and AJ basically moves around the ring? And I'm not saying that I expect him to do this, and we're going to, again, talk a lot more Usyk versus AJ 2 tomorrow. But what if AJ starts fighting the way that he fought Andy Ruiz in the rematch? And for the first couple rounds, starts moving around the ring and just throws jabs and punches to the body. Kind of tries to confuse Alexander Usyk. Again, I'm not saying that I think it's going to happen, nor am I saying that I advise this. But what if they totally throw a curveball here and Robert Garcia says, for the first couple rounds, do this. And it ends up being the antithesis to what you would expect Robert Garcia to bring to the table. But here's the thing. I don't think Robert Garcia is going to help AJ be willing to get punched any more than he likes to get punched. You know, a lot of Robert Garcia's fighters, they're extremely durable. And, you know, and obviously, I mean, there are a lot of cliches in boxing and a lot of, blanket statements, right? Like when Triple G started to emerge and as a champion and started saying Mexican style, right? So there are a few attributes that people sometimes lazily, but will generally place on Latino fighters, specifically Mexican fighters. And one of those is, having a chin. One of those is, coming forward, throwing a lot of punches, being durable. But we've talked about this in a past chat, but then you see a lot of Mexican fighters who are much more sweet scientists. And I look to Bam Rodriguez, Virgil Ortiz, both of which at different points of their career have been Robert Garcia trained fighters. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all thing when it comes to what Robert Garcia could potentially bring to the table. But, you look at other fighters, Brandon Rios, who lost his chin over the years, but he used to be a great, he used to have a great chin. Like if you look at his first fight against Mike Alvarado, y'all remember him? Alvarado versus Brandon Rios. One, Rios had a tremendous chin, and he did all the way up until I think his second fight with Alvarado or something like that. But or actually, I think Rios won the rematch against Alvarado. But AJ isn't gonna suddenly not mind getting hit. Certain fighters, you see their reaction to taking a nice shot, and it never changes throughout their career. Even the great Vladimir Klitschko, when you see him getting hit, sometimes like he'll do the thing where his arm starts crossing and it's like, whoa, that was kind of weird. Do it again, hit him again, see what happens. And then you see Vladimir start reacting poorly to getting hit. Julius Armstrong, I just saw, said greatest chin in boxing is Joe Joyce. He certainly appears to have one of the best chins. But AJ, I don't think that he's going to suddenly be willing to take a punch to give a punch or take two punches to give a punch. I don't think we're going to see that all of a sudden come out of Anthony Joshua. What I do think we're going to see, potentially, is a more committed attack to the body. With both hands, not just a jab to the body, but a right hand to the body. The one concern I have about that is when you see the way AJ was throwing the right hand to the body in their first fight, it looked a little clumsy. It looked a little slow and robotic. Like he changed levels and then went to the body. It was almost like he was just learning how to throw a right hand to the body. But if he's able to commit to a body attack on Usyk early and often, I think that's going to be the mark of Robert Garcia's influence. You know, Robert Garcia has trained too many good fighters that go to the body to not want to bring that to the table. So I imagine that would be one component. Another component will be to tie up more. Like, why does everything have to be at boxing range with Usyk? Especially if you outweigh the guy by 15 to 20 pounds. Why not? You know, if you throw a punch and miss, instead of standing in boxing range and then being vulnerable to like a straight left hand from Usyk or to let Usyk then circle out of range, why not force a clinch? And not only force a clinch, but force a clinch and walk him back to the ropes. Like, if you've ever been in a clinch and been walked back to the ropes, it looks like it's tiring for both guys. But try walking backwards with something or someone heavy on you and then have to walk backwards without falling down. Because that's where the fatigue comes in. It's not so much cardio fatigue as it is leg fatigue. And if you're AJ fighting the 35-year-old Usyk, and we're going to get right back into this tomorrow, why not try everything you can to tire the older guy's legs? And so, again, the challenge here, because when you're getting walked back to the ropes by a bigger guy, you could do one of two things. Same thing with if you're in a headlock. You could either carry that guy's weight in order to stay on your feet, so then you could walk all the way back until your back hits the ropes. And again, you're staying on your feet, or you could collapse. Like, there's certain fighters where I remember Shane Mosley started doing this a lot more. He didn't do it against Floyd Mayweather. But if a bigger fighter like a Fernando Vargas or something would get Shane Mosley into a headlock, he would just drop to a knee. It's not a knockdown. And if anything, it's just going to make the ref more adamant about warning the other guy about putting you in a headlock. But between headlocks and walking the guy back, the pressure is on the guy who's having to support the weight while staying on his feet. So make Usyk have to deal with that type of scenario. So that, again, if we see AJ do that, I think that would be a mark of Robert Garcia's influence. So those two things, a sustained attack to the body and the physicality component, but more specifically, tie-ups, headlocks, just all of those types of things. Again, I don't expect AJ to completely change his spots. I don't expect AJ to turn into Roberto Duran on his aggression. I think he's going to be a little more aggressive, but I don't expect him to suddenly become a totally different fighter in this rematch. Let's see. Going back to the Roger Gutierrez versus Hector Garcia fight for the 130-pound WBA belt. I see that TJ said, let's see, he said, Armstrong, I really like Hector Garcia over Roger Gutierrez this week. So that is one of those, in my book, kind of a pick'em style fight. TJ, who did you see who was the favorite between Garcia and Gutierrez? Because if I had to pick today, yeah, I think Hector Garcia is going to beat Gutierrez. Now, it might have been fool's gold for Hector Garcia to have beaten Chris Colbert, the fast-handed Brooklynite, Chris Colbert, in the way that he did, and maybe Chris Colbert did underestimate his performance. Again, Colbert was preparing to fight Roger Gutierrez, and then last minute replacement was Hector Garcia, right? Or not last minute, but maybe a week or two prior. But the way that Garcia was absorbing punches and was able to keep his foot on the gas throughout the middle and late rounds, I think Hector Garcia is going to be hell for Roger Gutierrez to deal with. Oh, so Hector Garcia is the favorite. Yeah, I'm not too surprised about that one. Yeah, that's going to be a very good fight. And again, that one is going to be on the Sergey Lipinets, or should I say Omar Figueroa versus Sergey Lipinets undercard. As will, what's the other good fight? Alberto Puello versus Akhmedov. That's going to be on the undercard as well. I see Brendan. We got Brandon Jackson in the house. What's going on, Brendan? Adam's Boxing Show. Oh, what is... heck yeah, what's going on? So I just started following Adam's Boxing Show. We had connected on Twitter. I think we were both commenting on a Boxing Wave video. So we kind of chopped it up in a couple of the comment threads. Yeah, appreciate you, Adam's Boxing Show, for coming through. Heck yeah. Check out his channel when you get a chance too. I see Navarrete versus... Eduardo Baez. Yeah, again, that's a very good fight. Navarrete is kind of seen to be the class of the division. Now, not to say that other guys in the division cannot beat him. I think Ray Vargas would stand a good chance to beat him, for instance. I think if Gary Russell Jr. ever did fight at 126 again, I think he's got a good chance potentially at beating Emmanuel Navarrete. That was a fight that I really wanted to see like a year ago or even 2 years ago. But yeah, Navarrete versus Baez, I'm doing a preview on that one tomorrow morning. Let's see. Yeah, I agree. Jared Casto, what's going on? Thank you for coming through. He said Zheli has a shot early if he could hurt Hrgovic. Yes, I agree. As do most southpaws, right? If you're gonna catch somebody with a clean shot, be a southpaw and do it early. Let's see. Hey, by the way, guys. Well, actually, let me get to your comments. Then I'm gonna ask this question. Let's see. Filip Hrgovic has zero head movement. So, Julius Armstrong, I agree. Well, okay, I'll say it like this. He doesn't have a lot of lateral head movement. I have seen some vertical level changing. So, there are 3 dimensions, right? And I forgot who I was watching who really impressed me with having all 3 dimensions of defense. Akeem Abdeslam. Thank you for coming through, Akeem. Heck yeah, welcome. There are 3 dimensions of defense as far as I see it. There's the lateral, left and right. There's the front and back. You see some taller fighters like Vitaly Klitschko was very good at pulling back, as is Floyd Mayweather Jr., obviously. So there's that dimension. Floyd had all 3 dimensions. And then there's the level changing up and down. So if you want to be a difficult target to hit, well, first of all, have great legs and move around, but also mix in the 3 different dimensions: the left, right, front, back, and then high, low. You've got, at that point, it's almost like shooting darts at a dartboard that's moving around like a fly or a wasp, So Hrgovic, I agree, I don't see a lot of left, right movement. I only see the pull back because that's usually what taller fighters will do, right? Because they're able to control range easier just being the taller, longer fighter. So you see Hrgovic do the back, and I even see a little bit of the high-low. But I agree, that could be a weakness of Hrgovic that's exploited. And again, it might take a southpaw 6'6" fighter like Zhang with hand speed to exploit that vulnerability. So yeah, that's again a fight definitely worth looking forward to. Let's see. between Navarrete and Eduardo Baez, can Baez survive to the 12th? Man, Emmanuel Navarrete puts you on such a crazy pace throughout the duration of the fight. If you want to see him at his best, watch him versus Christopher Diaz and watch him in both of his fights against Isaac Dogbe. You'll see like how terrifying and how big of a nightmare it is to fight a guy like Emmanuel Navarrete. Let's see. So Hrgovic is over a plus 500, so they're making Hrgovic more than a 5-1 favorite over Zheli. That, to me, that's a mispricing. I think that this fight is a lot more even. I could see maybe 2-1 at the highest, minus 300, 3-1 favorite for Hrgovic. But 5-1, that's a little bit disrespectful to Zheli. They must be looking really closely at that fight against Jerry Forrest. Let's see. Julius Armstrong said PBC always has the best undercards. For as much flack as PBC gets, for their highest profile fights, which this one isn't even one of their highest profile fights, right? But they have a big stable. So yeah, you often get a very good second and sometimes third fight. Golden Boy, I like a lot of Golden Boys undercards as well, which is kind of interesting because compared to Matchroom, compared to Top Rank, and compared to PBC, Golden Boy is almost like a mom and pop's shop style. They're basically they just have a smaller roster these days than they used to be, like the mothership. They used to be like the empire, right? Golden Boy was arguably the biggest promoter in boxing, but they're surprisingly able to get a good, second fight and sometimes even a good third fight on their undercards. Like if you look at what was the Virgil Ortiz fight, didn't we just have no, I'm conflating two different Golden Boy cards. They had Alexis Rocha recently fighting on the Ryan Garcia versus Javier Fortuna undercard, and then they had Blair Cobbs and Maurice Hooker fighting on the what was the one that Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Michael McKinson undercard, and I think they had two good undercard fights, or at least they had a notable fighter on the undercard. It was Marlon Esparza. It wasn't a great fight. It was a better fight than advertised because her opponent was unheralded, but her opponent ended up being more competitive than I thought Esparza thought she was going to be. Let's see. Yeah, Brendan Jackson said, I hope Zheli's stamina has improved. Yeah, I was talking about that one a little bit earlier. Again, thanks for coming through. But yeah, when he gassed out against Jerry Forrest, he had a medical issue, they say, right? Like he went to the hospital after that fight. By the way, I saw that my screen had just frozen. Let me know if I went out for a moment. It might have dropped audio for a sec. Akeem Boxing, what's going on? So my prediction for AJ versus Usyk 2, or Usyk versus AJ 2. So I just dropped a preview on that one about a week and a half ago. Feel free to check that out, but I will let you know. I am favoring, and by the way, I'm doing a live chat tomorrow, same time as today's live chat, but I'm going to talk all things Usyk, AJ 2. But I'm going with Usyk via late stoppage in that one. I think AJ's going to have better moments than he did in the first fight, but I think ultimately Usyk's going to stop AJ because I think that AJ, with the style that I expect him to employ, I think it's a little bit more feast or famine. Like you could go big or go home, but if you go home, you're going to have to get sent the hell home. And I think that might happen because if aggression and throwing more punches and committing more to your hard punches doesn't work for AJ, even if you're going to the body, then you're going to be more vulnerable, I believe, in the second half of the fight. But by the way, did you notice in Usyk versus AJ 1 that AJ was having such trouble hitting Usyk in the first 3 rounds that when he would commit to like right hands, he was almost like poking with the right hand. Like, let me see if I could touch the guy with the right hand. That's not the confidence that AJ needs to be throwing punches with. You can't be so uncertain about your ability to land that you start taking 20 miles off the fastball, Let's see. So I see TJ took Hector Garcia and Akhmedov and Lipinets. Yeah, that and Adrien Broner, which we'll get to that as well, pulling out of that Omar Figueroa Jr. fight, the real loser in that one is Omar Figueroa Jr. Because, I mean, you know, mental health issues aside for Adrien Broner, the loser here is Omar Figueroa Jr. because I think now he's actually faced with a more dangerous and viable opponent. Because it's not like Sergey Lipinets got a call, was on the couch eating Cheetos, and they said, you want to fight in a couple days? It's not that. He was already preparing for a fight. And I think that Sergey Lipinets at this stage of his career is better than Adrien Broner at this stage of his career. So I was, you know, I actually released a preview on Broner, on Broner versus Figueroa Jr., literally like minutes before I read that the fight was canceled. And I'm like, oh God, just cause, you know, the time that you put into it and stuff, like, you're like, oh no, like now this video means nothing. But I was picking Omar Figueroa Jr. to beat Adrien Broner, but via decision. I just didn't think Broner was going to throw enough punches. I thought he was going to be a sharper shooter, but I thought that even if Omar Figueroa Jr. is a nearly shot fighter, which if you look at his last fight against Abel Ramos, he looked terrible. Like, he was doing this whole stance switching and like he was moving his head to this side and then this side. It almost looked like Jim Carrey in like either The Mask or Cable Guy, where he was like doing that thing. But Omar Figueroa Jr. was trying this like experimental strategy against a good fighter, not a great fighter, but a good fighter in Abel Ramos. And it was working for like maybe the first round or something. And then Abel Ramos started to crack the code, started landing like hard right hands. And then Omar Figueroa Jr. by like the fourth and fifth round just looked like he was a shell of himself. His punch absorption wasn't the same. His activity level wasn't the same. His reflexes looked pretty bad. Omar Figueroa's did against Abel Ramos. So all that aside, hey, Ventura is in the house. What's going on? Thank you for coming through. So that bad fight between, bad performance for Omar Figueroa Jr. against Abel Ramos aside, I was still going to pick him to beat Adrien Broner via decision. But now, Adrien Broner pulls out and enters Sergey Lipinets. Well, Sergey Lipinets to me is still a very viable fighter. He hasn't been nearly as inactive as Adrien Broner, and his performances, even in that, you know, loss to Boots Ennis, he's still a more dangerous fighter, and I think that he's going to get to Omar Figueroa Jr. and I think he's probably going to stop this version of Omar Figueroa Jr. I just don't, for fighters who are good enough to commit to the stoppage, I don't think Omar Figueroa is nearly as durable. And the first fight that I saw that made me think, hey, Omar Figueroa has like dropped dramatically. Well, I mean, it was actually his first loss, which was against Yordenis Ugas. And so he looked even worse in his fight against Abel Ramos. So I don't think Omar Figueroa Jr. is nearly as good as he used to be. But again, I would have still picked him over Broner. I'm not going to pick him over Sergey Lipinets. Let's see. And not to say Lipinets is a great fighter at this point either, but I do think he's a lot better at 140 than he was at 147. He's just too short. Arms are too short. I just don't think he's maximizing his the attributes that make him a good fighter at 147. Right? He was competitive against Mikey Garcia. He bloodied Garcia's nose a bit, even though he got dropped and lost via decision to Mikey Garcia. He's a good 147 or 140 fighter. I think it was his fight after that Garcia, one or two fights later, that he stopped Lamont Peterson. So yeah, I think he's right now. I think he's a lot more viable than Omar Figueroa Jr. But it's just unfortunate for Figueroa Jr. that, at least to in my estimation, went from picking up a win against Broner to probably getting beaten up pretty badly against Sergey Lipinets. But who knows? I mean, Figueroa Jr. is one of those guys who, at his best, is a very durable and tenacious fighter. I just don't think he's got the same tools that he used to have. And again, if you rewatch Abel Ramos versus Figueroa Jr., you'll see what I'm talking about. First of all, it will look like, what the hell is that strategy that Figueroa was, employing? Again, it looked a little bit goofy to where the commentators were calling it experimental. And then it proved over the course of a few rounds to be ineffective as well. Let's see. TJ said, I like Robeisy Ramirez too. Yeah, he's tight at 126. Definitely one of those fighters to watch. And, Top Rank has got it going on when it comes to the 126-pound division. As do they, they do at 130 as well. and 135 to a degree, although 135 is more splintered. But yeah, those are definitely a couple. And obviously at 140, Top Rank is great there. Different divisions suit different promoters well, right? Let's see. I agree, Brendan Jackson. Zhang is going to be very dangerous early, I think, against Hrgovic. But I think if Hrgovic survives the first couple to, say, 2 to 4 rounds without getting hurt badly, I think from the 5th round on, it should be his fight to lose. Meaning, I think Hrgovic is going to take control and start winning the rounds at that point. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. By the way, did you guys ever see Akhmedov versus Barrios? I talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you want to see a very good Akhmedov fight, which again, Alberto Puello might turn out to be a better fighter than anybody could have pictured or imagined. He is a very good technical fighter, and he's a southpaw, and he's kind of tall for his division too. I think he's about like 5'9", and Akhmedov is about 5'7.5" or something like that. So yeah, but if you want to see a good Akhmedov fight that's like a very even but exciting fight, check out Mario Barrios versus Akhmedov, because the commentators go into that fight totally pro Barrios, and Barrios was looking good. He dropped him early, won like the first 2 to 3, 4 rounds. Barrios was just shining. And then Akhmedov quickly turned it around and started beating the hell out of Mario Barrios, to where like the whole side of Barrios' face was, it looked like an allergic reaction to bee stings. It looked bad. Let's see. Akeem Boxing said, I agree. I also think Usyk for the KO, because he fights for fighting for Ukraine. Yeah, and he wants to make a statement. Yeah, I do think that the conflict, or I'm not even going to call it a conflict, invasion, war, atrocity, you can call it what you want, right? I think that will be fuel for Alexander Usyk. Even though people did say that prior to him starting training camp for this rematch against AJ, that he was looking a little bit unhealthy. Well, he's looking pretty healthy right now, right? And he's looking big. But still, I don't buy that he's 245. Again, we'll see come weigh-in day, but I'm guessing he's going to be about maybe 231 to 235, somewhere in there. Let's see. Yeah, I agree, TJ. Lipinets too small for welterweight. Dangerous at 140. Let's see. Yeah, TJ said, I thought Barrios lost, to be fair. You know what? And the unofficial scorecard, as well as like Joe Goosen, who was a part of the call, as well as Lennox Lewis, they all thought that, Akhmedov seized control of that fight against Barrios. And the unofficial scorecard had it a draw at the end of the fight, because remember, Barrios dropped Akhmedov a second time in that fight in the final round. That was a big knockdown, 12th round knockdown, to basically kind of save the day for Mario Barrios against Akhmedov. But yeah, if you're looking round over round, you would have much rather have been Akhmedov in that fight than Mario Barrios. So it's going to be interesting. I expect Puello to win the early rounds against Akhmedov. This is going to be a 12-rounder. Is again, for the 140-pound WBA belt, one of the 2 belts Josh Taylor vacated. But it's going to be interesting to see if the sweet science of Alberto Puello from the Dominican Republic is going to be able to pretty much hold off the pressure fighter who starts turning up the temperature in the middle and late rounds, Akhmedov. That's going to be, again, very good fight to watch. And by the way, check out Badou Jack's opponent, Richard Rivera. He goes by the nickname Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm not lying. Popeye the Sailor Man, Richard Rivera, is going to be Badou Jack's opponent this coming weekend as well. But he's an undefeated fighter, and he seems to have some knockout power too. Badou Jack's definitely getting up there in age, and at least he's not fighting on Triller. At least he's fighting like a good fighter, or at least a good prospect this time. Badou Jack is. So that's something else to take a look at. Let me get to a couple more of your comments, and then I just want to talk Adrien Broner for a sec. Let's see. Mario Barrios is bigger and stronger than Puello. Yeah, I agree. He is bigger and stronger. I don't think he is as slick is the word, right? I don't think he's as slick as Puello, but he is bigger and he hits harder. He could thump. I mean, he was giving Tank Davis like trouble, I think, for the first half of that fight, winning a few rounds against Tank Davis, and was also, durable enough to withstand a lot of Tank Davis power punches. And then we obviously saw Barrios go the 12-round distance against Keith Thurman at 147, so he could take a beating. But Akhmedov looked like he could have potentially had Barrios in trouble in a couple of those moments in that fight. Akhmedov was giving Barrios hell. Venture asked, do I think AB should retire? So yeah, let me get into that. So Adrien Broner pulled out of the fight, citing mental health issues. He issued out a long... by the way, if you haven't hit the like, if you could please do that, that'd be fantastic. Thank you in advance. Again, it's usually that dude, MAW, who's usually reminding people in the comments to hit the like button, which is always appreciated. And I've seen MAW do that in other boxing channels as well. I'm sure like Boxing Wave appreciated that as well. But Adrien Broner issued like an Instagram clip, right, where he was talking about mental health is real, y'all, and I'm gonna be back, and basically just giving the reason why he pulled out of the fight. Omar Figueroa Jr. was having none of it. He basically said, he called, he said F Adrien Broner, basically just said this is BS, and he said, I'm not saying that you don't have mental health issues. We can all see you do. That's how Omar Figueroa Jr. put it. But he said, don't undermine my mental health issues and everybody else's mental health issues by using it as an excuse for your lack of training, for your lack of preparation. So Figueroa was suggesting that the reason why Broner pulled out of the fight was because he wasn't training hard. He wasn't ready to make weight. Because remember, this was going to be at 140. When's the last time Broner's fought at 140? His last fight was 147, right, against Giovanni Santiago. And his fight before that against Manny Pacquiao, I believe that was at 147. So I know his last two fights were 147. So it's been a while. And Broner has had trouble, making weight through... He's a 4-division champion, or at least a 4-division belt holder, major belt holder. So he's a 4-division champion, technically, and he's lost 2 of those titles on the scale. And those aren't the only 2 times he's missed weight. So this has been a thread throughout Adrien Broner's career. I saw the question, I saw the one about should he retire? I'm about to answer that one. And then I saw Bon Kiki, hey, thank you for coming through, asked, should AB be inducted into the Hall of Fame after retirement? I'm about to answer that one as well. So, 4-division champion. But if you look at his best wins, they came against Antonio DeMarco is one of them. Paulie Malignaggi is one of them. That's how he captured a share of the 147 belt. And it was DeMarco who he stopped in one of that. To me, that was one of Adrien Broner's best performances throughout his whole career. If you want to see AB at his best, go look at AB versus I just said his name. I just said his name. I forgot what it was. Antonio DeMarco. That might be his best performance. So, and that was, again, how he captured the lightweight belt. 4-division champion, but those were 2 of his 4 best wins. You'd have to really look, and then after that, who are his best wins against? I don't think he's got the resume to merit a Hall of Fame career, no. I think he's one of the rare cases that because of the politics in boxing and because you have 4 major belts in every division, you can be a belt holder in a division without beating a top 5, top 8 guy in the division. So, no, I think that he's been a very good fighter. At different times in his career, I thought that he had Hall of Fame potential. But no, I don't think he's got a Hall of Fame resume. No. And it's unfortunate. When he went up from 135, where he stopped Antonio DeMarco, and then I think he defended that belt once, he basically went straight to 147. He skipped 140. And he went from 135 to 147 to fight Paulie Malignaggi, which he narrowly won a decision to capture the belt. And then he fought Marcos Maidana, which as soon as they made that fight, I'm like thinking, bad idea. Because he didn't have knockout power at 147. He barely had knockout power at 135. To be honest, I thought he was at his best at 130. a division below where he fought Antonio DeMarco. So now you go to 135, you win a belt there, then you skip 2 divisions. I mean, are you kidding me? And then he fights Malignaggi, who's about as light a puncher as it gets at 147. And then you fight the dangerous Maidana. So to me, that was already a red flag. And he was a big favorite in that fight. And most people thought Broner was going to beat Maidana because Broner was still undefeated and he kind of had a glow about him. Like we see undefeated fighters today, right? You see somebody, the shiny new object of the era, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I think they would beat this guy and that guy. And by this point, Maidana had already lost to Amir Khan, and that was, I don't think that was his only loss. And he had gotten dropped multiple times against Victor Ortiz before beating Ortiz. So most people thought Broner was going to beat Maidana. Maidana ends up beating Broner, famously dropping him twice. And it feels like it was all downhill from that point on with Broner. He started having trouble making weight, and again, he had missed weight before that, but he started getting more and more legal issues and started showing more and more signs of mental health issues. So it's been super unfortunate for AB. And to the question of whether I think AB should retire, yeah. And I've been, off and on, I've been an AB fan. And he's one of those guys who, even when I've pulled against him in the ring, I mean, there were times where I pulled for Paulie Malignaggi against Adrien Broner, to be frank. And it was mostly because of how disrespectful Adrien Broner was, quite frankly, leading into the fight against Paulie. I don't have a problem with trash talk. I don't really even have a problem with hitting below the belt trash talk. I just saw their demeanor going into that fight, and I was pulling for Malignaggi to win that one. But in full disclosure, I pulled for Adrien Broner life-wise because I've always felt that at his best, he's a good dude. He's done a lot of scumbag stuff, and he's done a lot of things to people. He's assaulted people. You know what I mean? Like outside of the ring, assaulted people. And so I just don't want to see him end up I just don't want worst case scenario when it comes to Adrien Broner. And unfortunately, it looks like that's where the AB story is trending. I hope he's able to turn it around. And usually, or in a lot of cases, you say you want to see the guy in the ring because that's how you know that they're focused and they're working towards a goal and all of those types of things. But in the case of Adrien Broner, I hope he finds something healthy outside of boxing. I mean, getting punched in the head, I don't think is the best way to solve your mental health issues, So with AB, I wouldn't be upset to never see him in the ring again. I just think that might be the better life move for Adrien Broner at this point. He's just shown too many, even in his performance, his last fight against Giovanni Santiago, that looked pretty bad. I mean, he's not a shot fighter. That's the thing. He still has a chin, and he's still a sharp puncher. He's just not an active puncher, and it seems like he's been a little bit gun-shy to really let his hands go ever since that Maidana fight. Let's see. So in this era, is Broner a gatekeeper of 147, Bon Kiki? I wouldn't even say he's a gatekeeper. I think he's more just a celeb-style fighter. And I say that he's not a gatekeeper because you look at his choice of opponents lately. I mean, he had the big sweepstakes payday against Manny Pacquiao, but then he fought Giovanni Santiago, where it's like, who? That was more so just supposed to make Adrien Broner look good. That's what Santiago was there. Gatekeepers, I look at as being the litmus test to measure other up-and-coming prospect turn contenders against, right? Adrien Broner, to me, has no interest in fighting like a Stanionis or a Butayev, right? Or a Jamal James. Adrien Broner, he was about to fight a potentially shot fighter in Omar Figueroa Jr. So I wouldn't classify him as gatekeeper. Again, I look at gatekeepers as being guys who are still willing to take on tough fights that they'll probably lose. I see Adrien Broner trying to get paid fight by fight and looking for that path rather than being the guy who's like the litmus test for like the Hungry Lions coming up, So, let's see. Before we go, guys, I want to talk just for a moment about Tevin Farmer versus Mickey Bey. I don't know if anybody tuned into that fiasco. It was a pay-per-view. It was an inexpensive pay-per-view, but they were charging like $25, $30 or something like that. But it was such a bad production. Like during the undercard, they had, or between fights, they had like whoever was handling the camera, like literally laying the camera down so you're looking at nothing for like several minutes while you overhear like, you know, workers at the venue and just having a personal conversation that has nothing to do with boxing. You see them, like somebody finally pick up the camera and start like pointing it towards like a couple of the ring girls who are like twerking or dancing, like, you know, in the aisle. And then I find out, as I'm watching this stream, I find out via Instagram that the fight's off because the fighters didn't get paid by the promoter. And there was no promise to get paid by the promoter. That's just bad management. There should have been a lot of like I's dotted and T's crossed before they signed that fight. It was a fiasco. It was terrible. And I feel bad for Tevin Farmer and for Mickey Bey. You know, they were out of a payday. I don't think they had insurance on it. So at the end of the day, they trained and didn't get paid. That's pretty brutal if you're a fighter, especially if you're one of the fighters that isn't making millions of dollars per fight, or even a million, you know, a couple million or a million, or I don't know what Mickey Bey got paid in his last couple fights, but I don't think they're making millions per fight. I'll put it like that. Even though Tevin Farmer had a pretty nice run on his own while he was one of the 130-pound belt holders. Let's see. So we're about to wrap this one up in a second, guys. I want to thank you guys once again for tuning in. Like always, Julius Armstrong, Bone Key, Jay Foreman, Nothing is Original. And Nothing is Original just said, you're completely right. AB is finished, but had a solid career. I could see him fighting a Jake Paul or something like that. Yeah, sure. Or Conor McGregor. Like if Conor wanted to fight AB would be all about it. You know, something more along those lines. TJ, thanks again for coming through. And I see, let's see, yeah, Ventru, thanks again. Hot Facts with Robert Reese. Let's see, I see an interesting convo on I see Shakur Stevenson mentioned. I see Devin Haney mentioned. Heck yeah! I mean, those are fights that I would love to see. Somebody said Tank has the best shot against Haney. Haney's a smarter fighter than T.O., who Loma had no answer for. That was Bone Kiki. Yeah, look, any permutation in that division, I would just love to see it. It looks like Top Rank is holding most of the cards, being right as it stands. They've got the undisputed champion. They've got we'll say the most respected all-around fighter probably in the division in Lomachenko, just because he's got the longest track record and he's kind of seen to be like the sweet scientist, the Matrix and all that. And they have the best 130-pound fighter in Shakur Stevenson, and it's only a matter of time before he goes up to 135 from 140. So they're holding most of the cards right now. But it's super frustrating to see a lot of these negotiations take place. By the way, do any of you guys know if Gervonta Davis re-signed with Mayweather Promotions? Because my thing is, if Steven Espinosa and Showtime are refusing to do a co-promotional pay-per-view with Golden Boy and DAZN, isn't Gervonta Davis the one who was saying before his fight with Raleigh, like, I want to take things into my own hands? Well, if you, one, want to take things into your own hands, and then two, want to fight Ryan Garcia, I think that Gervonta Davis needs to do more to hold Espinosa and Mayweather Promotions and Showtime's feet to the fire, saying, no, get me this fight. And if he is a free agent and they don't want to acquiesce and to honor his wishes, which they're supposed to be working for him, his promoter's supposed to be working for him, right? Well, if they say, no, we don't want to do what you want us to do to get the fight that you want, why doesn't Gervonta Davis say, okay, that's fine. I'm going to do this one-off with Golden Boy and DAZN. Thank you. What is stopping that from happening? And I get the whole loyalty thing, but how loyal is a fighter supposed to be to his promoters? I mean, the promoters are supposed to be promoting the fighter and, working on behalf of the fighter. If Davis declares what he wants and they say no, then Davis needs to, even if it's just for one fight, Davis needs to take his business elsewhere. And you know De La Hoya and DAZN would be down because they get this. De La Hoya is basically, he's sort of on the hook for DAZN, right? He needs to bring them content. Well, if he brings them Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis, or Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, even if it's just for 1 or 2 fights, because PBC or Mayweather Promotions and they didn't want to play ball, it's all good for all the parties that matter in this case. You know what I mean? So I'm curious to know if Gervonta Davis is still truly a free agent. And if he's not, and just went right back to re-signing with Mayweather Promotions, who's not then honoring his wish, then shame on Gervonta Davis for doing it. You just messed up your career in a lot of ways. So we'll see what happens there. And, you know, here's the thing. I agree with Mayweather Promotions and Leonard Ellerby in the sense that Gervonta Davis is the A side in Davis versus Ryan Garcia. He is the A side. But you can't just say because we have the leverage, it's 100% our way or no way. Okay, so they're going to negotiate on weight. If Mayweather Promotions says it has to be 135, okay. But then if Steven Espinoza also says, no, this has to be all Showtime, no involvement from DAZN, Ryan Garcia has to just jump over to our side, and that's that. That sounds like a deal breaker. That sounds like a deal breaker right there. Wait, so Bone Kiki said Tank is not a free agent. He's TMT follower. But is that true? Is that true, or is that what we suspect might be happening? Is that what we think is the case? What I want to know is, because reports were that Gervonta Davis after this Raleigh fight was a free agent, right? If he was a free agent, did he actually re-sign with Mayweather Promotions? The answer to that question, to me, answers a lot of questions, and even starts new questions about, well, then what the hell? Why don't you just go with Golden Boy for a one-off to make that fight with Ryan Garcia happen? Foo's 8-Ball Gamer, what's going on? Yeah, thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. He said Tank is not the A side. That would mean Money Mayweather would have to pay Ryan a lot of money, and they don't want to break off that bread. What I mean by A side is, wait, and then I see Bone Kiki also saying Tank is not an A side. Only one of these two guys have actually had pay-per-view events though. And if you look at the gate per fight for these guys, it's close. I'll say that it's close, but Gervonta Davis has been fighting on pay-per-view, even if they've been lower selling pay-per-views. We haven't seen Ryan Garcia have to report pay-per-view numbers yet. So Tank is now like 3 or 4 fights in on the pay-per-view side. So, and he's going from city to city. He's going from New York City, Madison Square Garden, to Atlanta, to DC, I believe, or, you know, I mean, I went to his fight when he came out to California and fought in Carson. Gervonta Davis has been packing the house, and if not, you know, packing, then close. You get what I'm saying. But I'm not saying that he has more, you know, followers on social media. None of that. I'm just saying that relatively speaking, but right now, again, it's close. But Gervonta Davis would be the A-side fighter against Ryan Garcia. And plus, he's been a 2 or 3 division, one legitimate division, in my opinion, only 130. I don't look at Gervonta Davis as being an actual champion at 135 or an actual champion after beating Barrios at 140. That was all those playground belts, not the real thing, right? But he's the only person between these two guys who's been a champion. Tank Davis has. Again, I'm saying that it's close, but Gervonta Davis would be the A-side fighter against Ryan Garcia. You're right, Stan Tucker, aka Dad, in the house. He said maybe Tank doesn't want Garcia. That's kind of making me think, because again, Tank's not. He knows enough about the business to know that. He knows what are deal breakers and what business needs to be conducted for a fight to take place. So if you want the fight and you're a free agent, you've got to start, even if you're not a free agent, you've got to start making demands to your upline, to your promoter, and ultimately to the network, right? Because Mayweather Mayweather has to answer to Showtime or vice versa, and Mayweather Promotions has to, and Leonard Ellerbe have to answer to Gervonta Davis. If they're not doing what the guy wants, then you take your business elsewhere, or you start raising hell against your promoter. But if you were a free agent and this is what you wanted, and then you just blindly went back into re-signing, again, then shame on Gervonta Davis, because he broke up that fight, in my opinion. But again, the question, or the answer to the question of whether or not he actually re-signed, that's an important question to answer. And I don't know the answer to that. And I actually asked on Twitter today, I asked Rick Glazer, who's a boxing insider. I asked Mike Coppinger. I asked Michael Benson, who's he's like the major news breaker, right, in boxing. And they don't seem to have the answers to that question either. Let's see. Golden Boy can offer more money to opponents for Ryan Garcia, but look, we don't know that for a fact. Here, look, comparatively, it seems as if PBC actually pays their A-side fighters on average more, to the point where even Eddie Hearn in interviews said, "Yo, I don't know where they're even getting this money. There's not even enough money in these fights that they're promoting to pay this guy this much, and to pay Terrence Crawford this and Sean Porter this," right? Eddie Hearn is saying, I don't even know where they're getting the money. I don't know how they're able to stay in business, is what Eddie Hearn says. So, they do offer a lot of money. It's hard to see, or it's hard to confirm between these parties who offers more money. But I'll say this, and I'll agree with you here. It does appear that PBC loves to play hardball, and we've seen this between the Errol Spence and the Terrence Crawford thing, to where they reportedly, or at least rumored, which I'm not going to put too much emphasis in that, kind of lowball the B, who they view as the B-side fighter. That's what appears to be the case. But again, I can't even confirm that, because information is so scarce in a lot of these scenarios. But the whole other side of the thing still remains true. We know Tank Davis, or at least reportedly, was a free agent at some point after that Rolly Romero fight. What happened after that is what I want to know. But yeah, like, if Tank wants to fight, I feel like they can make it happen. If Tank doesn't really want to fight, we're just going to see these games keep on being played where they will talk trash against each other, and then they'll both go their separate ways and sign up to fight other guys, and then the fight doesn't happen again. And they continue to make the money that they've been making, and the show goes on, right? But yeah, we're about to wrap this one up, guys. Again, I appreciate you guys for coming through. Heck yeah. Let's see. And again, by the way, check out tomorrow morning, I'm going to drop the Emmanuel Navarrete versus Eduardo Baez preview. And tomorrow evening, same time as today's chat, we're going to do all things Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua 2 tomorrow evening. So I hope you guys can make it for that one. We're definitely going to get into the weeds. We're going to get into legacies. We're going to get into careers. We're going to get into what does it mean if this guy wins, that guy loses, and all that. We're going to do a deep dive in all things Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk 2, which obviously will also have Tyson Fury components and Deontay Wilder components. Not to mention even Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker components. But yeah, thank you guys once again for coming through. Always appreciate these chats with y'all. Yeah, so you guys are bringing up a lot of good points and a lot of good thoughts and comments here. All right, y'all. Until next time, I hope to see you guys tomorrow. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.